What would happen next was one of the longest hijackings in history, and one that plummeted German society further into fear and terror. The 6th of October 1977. 1,300 kilometers away from the city of Cologne, on the Balearic island of Mallorca, a Palestinian man by the name of Zoher Youssef Akache arrives in Palma de Mallorca airport on the 6th of October. He checks in at the Hotel Costa Azul. The next day, on the 7th, 2 others join him, a woman by the name of Souheila Sayeh and a man called Wabil Harb, both Lebanese nationals. The group appeared to be tourists, going about their day visiting sites and sampling the city's restaurants and bars. Nothing seems out of the ordinary. On the same day, Akache and Sayeh meet with a woman and her husband, one Monica Haas, and a man travelling on a forged Persian passport in the name of Servati Kamal. His real name? Unknown. Haas and the man are with a baby carriage. In it is a baby, but less obviously also 2 pistols, 6 grenades and a kilogram of high explosives, packaged in English sweet tins. The exchange between Haas and the 2 supposed tourists goes off without a hitch, and they return to the Costa Azul hotel with ammunition, weapons and high explosives. Some strange souvenirs to bring back from a holiday, indeed. A final person joins the group on the 8th of October, a Palestinian woman called Nadia Duaibes, who turns out to be Akache's lover, revealing some issues within the group. Sayeh and Akache are meant to be posing as lovers, and it irritated her that his actual lover was here. Thus, to make it more believable, they swapped rooms and roles. Now, it might have occurred to the more observant viewer at this point that these people aren't your average tourists. If we trace back their steps, we can see that earlier in the month they were in Iraq, in the capital of Baghdad, meeting with the top brass of Palestinian militant organizations such as Wadi Haddad, the leader of the PFLP. Here they are informed that they are to hijack a German passenger plane from Mallorca. They are initially not given much information as to why, nothing beyond to, quote, secure the release of Palestinian compatriots in Israel. They are sent to final weapons training at a PFLP facility, and then they all set off on their fateful journey to Mallorca. 13th of October, 1977. It is a cold, overcast Thursday in the city of Palma. The 4 hijackers leave the Hotel Costa Azul in the morning and take the 15-minute drive to the Palma de Mallorca airport. They have with them a radio and a vanity kit. Within them are stashed the grenades, pistols, ammunition, and explosives that they picked up the week prior. Once they arrive at the airport, they pass through security fairly easily. You see, it had only been 2 years since the International Civil Aviation Organization, also known as ICAO, had convened to draft one of the world's first comprehensive standardizations of airport security. But even then, recommendations were limited, vague, and left much up to individual states to decide how to implement security measures. Mallorca, one of Spain's smaller airports, had probably not undergone security modernizations yet due to this. At 12:30, the hijackers board Lufthansa Flight 181, nicknamed Landshut after a town in the state of Bavaria in southern Germany. About 1 hour later, the aircraft is airborne, travelling to its intended destination of Frankfurt. However, at some point shortly after takeoff, just as the cabin staff start distributing food, the 4 hijackers leap into action, jumping from their seats, gesturing wildly and shouting at passengers. They clear the first-class cabin and directed all passengers into the remaining seats in second class. Everything that could be used as weaponry against the hijackers, such as the forks and knives from the prepared meals, are taken away. Personal effects and identification, like passports, are also confiscated. Finally, the hijackers breach the cockpit, removing the co-pilot Jürgen Vietor from the cabin and shoving him into economy class with the rest of the hostages. They demand that the flight be rerouted to Cyprus, but due to the lack of fuel, the pilot Jürgen Schumann suggests landing in Rome instead. At 2:38, a flight tracking station in Aix-en-Provence picks up that the aircraft is off course. It is also around this time that the first communications come from the aircraft, with the leader, Akache, who is styling himself as Captain Walter Mahmoud, speaking over the radio, announcing that the aircraft is now under his supervision and control. Flight 181 lands in Rome's Fiumicino airport at 3:45, and the hijackers demand that the plane be refueled. Akache radios the traffic control tower and demands for the release of political prisoners being held in West German prisons. This is the first indication that the hijacking is linked to the Schleier kidnapping and the Red Army faction. In Rome, the flight's captain, Schumann, drops 4 cigars out of the window to communicate to authorities how many hijackers are on board. This tactic works, and authorities correctly guess the intent of the message. By 5:45, the aircraft has been refueled and now sets a course for Cyprus's Nicosia airport. But mid-flight is informed by other Lufthansa pilots in the vicinity that Nicosia is non-operational. Presumably, this meant Nicosia would not allow the plane to land there. Instead, Flight 181 is redirected to Larnaca Airport, south of Nicosia. While this was happening, the West German government, headed by Chancellor Helmut Schmidt, mobilized the anti-terror task force known as GSG-9, Grenzschutzgruppe 9, and as soon as they were able, had them head for an intercept course to Cyprus. Once the aircraft had landed in Larnaca at 8:28, the hijackers again demanded to be refueled, otherwise they threatened to detonate the explosives they had on the aircraft. They also repeated their request for the release of German prisoners, as well as 2 more Palestinians held in Turkish prisons. While they were on the ground, the Cypriot foreign minister attempted to negotiate a release of, quote, women, children, and the sick, who were on the plane, but he made no headway. Following this, an unnamed man who claimed to be part of the Palestinian liberation movement in Cyprus attempted to talk to the hijackers' leader. However, Akache instantly barked a retort. "I do not care who you are. Whoever you are, I don't want to talk to you." In the background, the 30 GSG-9 officers had been en route to Cyprus on Flight 1231 and had landed on the island while Flight 181 was still there at around 9:20. However, they had landed at the British Akrotiri airbase some way southwest, presumably not to alert the hijackers. They were ultimately unable to reach the aircraft in time before it took off for its next destination, and thus they relocated to Ankara for further instruction. At around 10:50, the aircraft was yet again airborne and initially headed for Beirut, then Damascus, then Kuwait. They were denied landing permission by all 3 airports. They travelled for some time more before finally reaching Bahrain at 1:32 in the morning. They only stay here for just under 2 hours, again repeating the demands for the release of prisoners, further confirming the connection to the RAF, and setting a deadline for this ultimatum, threatening to blow the plane sky high by 9 AM on Sunday the 16th if the demands are not met. That gives only 2 days for the West Germans to organise a response. The plane departs Bahrain en route for Dubai International Airport at around 3:24 in the morning, but it is forced into a holding pattern until merely minutes before they run out of fuel they are permitted to land at 5:51. It is now the 14th of October. More than 16 hours have passed since the aircraft left Mallorca and since it was hijacked. While they are stationed in Dubai, the hijackers make requests for water and food and continue to make demands. In West Germany, Chancellor Schmidt elects to send his state secretary, Hans-Jürgen Wisniewski, to Dubai, with an additional 31 GSG-9 officers and $4 million in bargaining cash. They board an Airbus 707 codenamed Oscar X-Ray in the afternoon and arrive in Dubai at around 11:35 in the evening. For the rest of the following day, Wisniewski is engaged in negotiations with the hijackers, but is unable to convince them to release the hostages or come to a compromise. After nearly 2 days on the aircraft, conditions are starting to become uncomfortable for the passengers, with them being forced to stay in their cramped seats at threats of violence if they move. The pilot Schumann is allowed to make a statement directed at Chancellor Schmidt over the radio at 7:50 in the morning on the 15th of October. The lives of 91 men, women and children on board this flight are at the mercy of your decision. You are our last and only hope. Wisniewski persuades the UAE Defense Minister Mohammed bin Rashid to allow a scouting operation on his territory, on the condition UAE forces are allowed to participate. Disguised as mechanics, they scout the plane out and deliver food, water and medicine, and even a birthday cake to the aircraft to celebrate one of the stewardesses' birthdays. Tensions ease here somewhat, but not for long. Negotiations between the hijackers and Wisniewski continue until the 9 AM deadline on Sunday the 16th. But nothing happens. The hijackers don't blow up the plane. At 12:19, on the same day, the aircraft takes off yet again and attempts to land at Oman's Masirah airport, but is denied landing permission. At this point, control towers tracking the plane lose it for some time. Suddenly, the plane appears over Yemeni airspace and demands landing permission at Aden airport. As they only have roughly 10 minutes of fuel left, they do not wait for an answer, with Akache barking, "We are coming in, I repeat, we are coming in." They land just adjacent to the runway, on a flat, sandy area at around 3:55. The pilot, Schumann, tells the hijackers this may have damaged the landing gear. As soon as word comes in that the aircraft has landed at Aden, Wisniewski and his GSG-9 contingent mobilized to Yemen. But they are denied landing and are ultimately rerouted to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. At this point, Chancellor Schmidt radios Wisniewski, giving him the green light on a more forceful approach. Schumann is given permission to go inspect the landing gear after the rough landing, and while doing so, wanders into the security cordon set aside by Yemeni security forces and tries to convince them to not let the plane take off. When he returns, Akache accuses him of trying to escape and forces him to kneel in the aisle of the cabin, before shooting him in the head in front of the passengers and dumping his body onto the tarmac. The first casualty of the hijacking. The co-pilot, Jürgen Vitor, is forced into the cabin and told to take off in the direction of Somalia. The plane takes off from Aden at 2:02 in the morning on October the 17th and lands in Mogadishu a little over 2 hours later at 4:35. As soon as the plane touches down in Mogadishu, Schmidt gets into contact with the Somali president, Siad Barre, who after some negotiation allows the West German forces to stage a rescue attempt. Following the agreement, the second group of GSG-9 commandos, which had since relocated to Crete from Cologne, is given the green light to fly south to Somalia to regroup with the other squad. On board are medical personnel provided by the Greek government in case the operation goes sour. The first plane, en route from Saudi Arabia, arrives in Mogadishu at 11:44 on the 17th. And the second at 5:30 with their lights off as to not alert the hijackers. The hijackers become increasingly unsettled and start to escalate their threats, tying up hostages and dousing them in the remaining on-board liquor to scare negotiators into thinking a bombing was imminent. This caused West German negotiators to feign acquiescence to their demands, stating they would release the requested 11 prisoners and fly them directly to Mogadishu. This was a bluff, and it got the hijackers to untie the hostages. Akache then informed the Mogadishu Tower and the negotiators that it is 7 hours flying time from Germany. I will give you exactly 7 hours. Don't try any tricks. He agreed to put off the ultimatum of blowing up the plane until 3:30 a.m. the next morning. So, the GSG-9 had only a few hours to strike before the hijackers realized there was something wrong. They struck quickly, setting their assault into motion at 5 minutes past midnight. Back in Bonn, a member of Schmidt's crisis group testified that just before and as the assault was occurring, the room was deathly silent. He stated, "You could have heard a speck of dust move." The suspense was palpable. Back in Mogadishu, the German forces are slowly creeping their way over to the plane, camouflaged in black to obscure their presence. The hijackers are completely unaware. They reach the underside of the aircraft and place explosive charges on the doors. Finally, a diversionary explosion on the runway is set off, and the GSG-9 group detonate their explosives. They place ladders on the side of the aircraft and quickly climb in, shouting "Hinlegen, hinlegen," lie down, as they rush into the cabin and neutralize the hijackers. One, Nadia Dweibis, is shot and she crumples down into the toilet at the front of the plane. Akache is shot in the cockpit and slumps onto the center console, and Nadil Harb survives long enough to be dragged out of the plane and given medical attention. But he dies at the scene. Only one survives, Soheila Sayeh, and she is brought out on a stretcher, asking the commandos to kill her. At the end of the assault, which took only 7 minutes, one commando had been injured by returning small arms fire, as well as 4 passengers and 1 stewardess. But no casualties, except, of course, for the pilot who had been murdered 2 days before. A call is made to Bonn. Mr. Wisniewski states over the phone, "Die Arbeit ist erledigt." Job is done.